Power rewards arrogance, until it collects its debt. In Seoul, control is not loud. It moves through private elevators, through reservations that never close, through calendars that rearrange themselves around a single name. The men who hold it rarely shout. They simply exist at altitudes where refusal becomes impossible. Kang Jun-suk understood this perfectly. At 39, he owned half a skyline. Chairman of JH Holdings. Patron of invitation-only auctions. A face that appeared beside words like inevitable and untouchable. His enemies described him with silence and distance. He forgot his son's birthday. Not by accident. By the time he walked into that restaurant in Itaewon, relaxed, composed, with another child's hand in his, the woman watching from across the room had already decided something. Not emotionally. Logically. By sunrise, the man who thought he owned everything would learn he never owned himself. The reminder had been sent 3 weeks earlier. Digital calendar. Household secretary. A soft mention at breakfast over tea that had gone cold while Jun-suk answered emails on his phone. On the morning of Min-jun's 7th birthday, Kang Jun-suk left the penthouse before sunrise. Tie straight. Phone pressed to his ear. The door closed with the kind of softness that comes from expensive hinges and careful hands. No gift waited on the dining table. No card. No acknowledgement. Min-jun sat in his school uniform, legs folded neatly beneath him. He did not ask questions. He had learned early which silences were permanent and which were temporary. This one felt like marble, cool, solid, unmovable. His mother, Seo Hae-in, poured the soup. Adjusted the place setting. Said nothing. She did not sigh. She did not glance at the door. She moved through the morning the way she always did, precisely, quietly, as though the day had been designed this way from the beginning. By noon, Jun-suk was already in Gangnam. A board meeting that required his presence but not his attention. He signed documents between calls. Approved budgets that would reshape neighborhoods. His assistant reminded him of a dinner reservation for the following week. He confirmed it without looking up. The birthday did not cross his mind. Not because he was cruel. Because he had constructed a life where forgetting was a function of priority, and priority was a function of power. At 3 in the afternoon, he toured a development site in Songpa. Steel frames rose against the skyline like promises. The architect spoke about light and flow. Jun-suk nodded at the correct intervals. His mind was already in Singapore, reviewing a contract that would close by Thursday. Wealth insulates. It creates distance between action and consequence. Between choice and guilt. Between a son waiting at a breakfast table and a father who had already moved past the moment before it arrived. That evening, Hae-in took Min-jun to Itaewon. Not for celebration. He was too tired for that. The untouched cake sat in the refrigerator at home. The piano lesson had been quiet. She had watched him play scales with the same focus he used for everything, serious, contained, careful not to expect too much. The restaurant was modest. No photographers. No mirrors. A place Jun-suk rarely visited because it did not reflect the life he had built. They ordered simply. Soup. Rice. Grilled fish. Min-jun ate slowly, methodically. He did not complain. He did not ask why his father had not come home. He had inherited his mother's restraint, though he did not yet understand it as a strategy. Hae-in watched him across the table. She did not smile sadly. She did not reach across to touch his hand. She simply observed him the way she observed everything, with the calm attention of someone who had learned that emotion without preparation was indulgence. The door opened at 7:15. Jun-suk walked in first. Perfect posture. Shoulders relaxed. Not the boardroom version of himself, but the man after the performance. The one who had removed the armor but kept the certainty. Behind him followed a boy. About 7 years old. Same height as Min Jun, same narrow shoulders. Same birthmark beneath the left ear. The hostess greeted Jun-suk by name. The manager bowed deeper than protocol required. Jun-suk's hand rested briefly on the boy's shoulder, too familiarly, too comfortably, as he guided him toward a private table near the back. Hae-in did not freeze. She did not gasp. She did not look away. She lifted her teacup. Took a sip. Set it down without sound. Her face remained neutral. Her breathing is steady. To anyone watching, she might have been reviewing a menu or considering the weather. But something inside her, something that had been waiting for years without announcement, clicked into position. Not rage. Clarity. Jun-suk never noticed her. He was explaining the menu, his voice low and patient. The boy laughed softly at something. A private joke. A moment that belonged only to them. Min Jun noticed first. Children always do. He stared. Tilted his head slightly. His chopsticks paused halfway to his mouth. He did not speak. He did not point. He simply looked at his mother with a question he did not yet know how to ask. Hae-in met his eyes. She nodded once. Small. Invisible to anyone else. Later. The meal continued. Jun-suk never turned around. He was absorbed in the performance of fatherhood, the version he had carved out for this other child, in this other space, on this other night. By the time the appetizers arrived at his table, Hae-in had already decided something. Not emotionally. Logistically. Like a woman who had lived too long inside systems to believe in confrontation. She paid the bill quietly. Took Min Jun's hand. Left through the side door without looking back. That night, she tucked Min Jun into bed at exactly 9:30. She turned off the light. Kissed his forehead once. Said nothing about what they had seen. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. Instead, she opened an old file. The hostess had hesitated. Just for a second. When Jun-suk entered with the boy, her smile had arrived half a beat too late. Not noticeably. Not enough to offend. But enough. Hae-in had been watching. From her table near the window, she had seen the manager straighten his spine, the way staff do when power enters a room. She had seen the hostess glance briefly toward the corner, toward her, before redirecting Jun-suk to the private section. The boy walked beside him easily. Comfortable. Familiar. He wore a navy jacket. Clean sneakers. Hair parted neatly to the side. He carried himself with the same careful posture Min Jun had, the kind taught by private tutors and reinforced through repetition. Jun-suk guided him to a booth. Sat across from him. Reached for the menu without looking at the room. He did not scan for familiar faces. He did not check over his shoulder. He moved with the certainty of a man who believed his worlds never overlapped. The boy said something. Jun-suk smiled, a rare expression, one Hae-in had not seen in years. He leaned forward slightly, the way people do when they are listening, not performing. Min Jun's hand tightened around his chopsticks. Hae-in placed her own hand gently on the table. Not touching him. Just present. The meal continued. Jun-suk ordered for both of them. The boy nodded eagerly. There was no tension between them. No awkwardness. This was not a new arrangement. This was routine. Hae-in noted the details. The way Jun-suk adjusted the boy's napkin without prompting. The way the boy reached for the water glass on the correct side. The way they shared a dish without negotiation. She did not feel heartbroken. She felt observation. This was not a discovery. This was confirmation. A waiter approached their table. Jun-suk spoke quietly, gestured toward the boy with something close to pride. The waiter nodded, smiled, and retreated. Across the room, Min-jun had stopped eating. He was staring. Not obviously. But his focus had narrowed to a single point. His body had gone still in the way children's bodies do when they are trying to solve something too large for their understanding. Hae-in did not tell him to look away. She simply waited. After a moment, Min-jun turned back to his own plate. He ate slowly. Mechanically. His expression had not changed, but something in his posture had. A small closing. A door locking quietly from the inside. Hae-in recognized it. She had done the same thing once. Across the restaurant, Jun-suk laughed. The sound was soft, genuine. The boy grinned up at him, his face bright in the low light. Hae-in took another sip of tea. Set the cup down. Folded her napkin neatly beside her plate. She did not stare. She did not react. She simply absorbed. The boy had the same birthmark. The same bone structure. The same careful mannerisms came from being raised in privilege. This was not an affair. This was architecture. A second foundation. A parallel structure. Built quietly, maintained carefully, hidden only from those who were not supposed to see it. Jun-suk had not made a mistake tonight. He had made a choice. He had chosen this restaurant because it was far from his usual circles. He had chosen this night because it was Min-jun's birthday, a date he knew Hae-in would not expect him to be free. He had chosen this boy because he believed the two halves of his life would never meet. But they had. And now, so had she. Hae-in paid the bill without calling the waiter over. She left cash on the table. Took Min-jun's hand. Stood smoothly, without hurry. As they walked toward the door, she glanced back once. Not at Jun-suk. At the boy. He was laughing again. Unaware. Protected by ignorance and proximity to power. Hae-in turned away. Outside, the air was cool. The street was quiet. Min-jun walked beside her without speaking. She did not explain. She did not apologize. She simply walked. By the time they reached the car, something inside her had shifted. Not emotionally. Structurally. She had spent years believing that silence was survival. Tonight, she realized it could also be a strategy. The drive home was quiet. Min-jun stared out the window. Hae-in kept her hands steady on the wheel. When they arrived at the penthouse, she unlocked the door. Guided him inside. Prepared him for bed with the same calm precision she always used. He did not ask questions. She did not offer answers. At 9:30, she turned off his light. At 9:35, she sat alone in the study. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She opened her laptop. Typed a single name into the search bar. Waited. The results populated slowly. Legal databases. Corporate filings. Old news articles. She clicked through them methodically. Her face remained neutral. Her breathing is even. By midnight, she had confirmed what she already knew. The boy's name was registered. His trust was active. His legal guardian was listed under a subsidiary Jun-suk had restructured 2 years earlier. This was not hidden. It was documented. Jun-suk had simply assumed no one would look. Hae-in closed the laptop. Stood. Walked to the window. Seoul stretched out below her, lights moving steadily through the grid, systems functioning without pause. She did not feel anger. She felt certainty. Some collapses begin the moment observation becomes action. And tonight, she had stopped watching. The apartment was silent. Jun-suk had not returned. He would not. Not tonight. Thursday evenings had become predictable in their absence, late meetings that extended past midnight, hotel stays justified by early morning commitments across the city. Heian did not wait for explanations anymore. She sat at the desk in the small study off the master bedroom. The one room Jun-suk never entered. His world existed in the main spaces, the living room where deals were discussed, the dining room where appearances were maintained. This room belonged to her. She opened the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath old tax documents and property deeds, was an encrypted drive. Small. Silver. Unmarked. She had purchased it 8 years ago in Daegu, during the 6 months before the wedding. Back when she still worked in corporate compliance. Back when she understood that systems protected those who documented everything and forgot nothing. The drive connected smoothly. Password entered from memory. The folders opened. Inside, hospital records from a private clinic in Gangnam. Corporate registry filings showing subsidiary formations. A paternity affidavit, notarized but never submitted. Bank statements tracking transfers to a residential trust in Seongsadong. At the time, she had been advised to delete them. "You're marrying into a chaebol family," her mentor had said quietly over tea. "Some doors close permanently once you walk through them. Carrying old keys only makes you dangerous to yourself." She had nodded. Smiled politely. And saved everything. Not out of paranoia. Out of training. She had spent 5 years auditing corporations before marriage. She had learned that power protects itself through documentation, and that the only defense against a system was to become fluent in its language. These files were not evidence of betrayal. They were evidence of structure. The paternity affidavit was dated 7 years and 4 months ago. Signed by Jun-suk. Witnessed by a lawyer whose name appeared on multiple JH Holdings contracts. The document had never been filed with the family court, but it existed. Legal. Binding. Waiting. The hospital record showed a birth at a private facility. No media coverage. No public announcement. Just clean documentation and a discharge summary listing a mother whose name Heian recognized from corporate event attendance lists. The subsidiary formation came 6 months later. A residential trust. Managed holdings. Monthly transfers are structured to appear as operational expenses rather than personal support. Jun-suk had not hidden this. He had simply organized it. Heian scrolled through the files without emotion. Her face remained neutral. Her breathing is steady. This was not a discovery. This was inventory. She opened a new folder. Created a timeline. Cross-referenced dates with corporate filings, property acquisitions, and charitable foundation formations. Patterns emerged. Every major expansion of JH Holdings had been followed by adjustments to subsidiary structures. Every new trust had been created within months of a board restructuring. Every legal entity served dual purposes, operational and personal. Jun-suk had built a system where his wealth could support multiple lives without any single structure becoming vulnerable. It was efficient. It was intelligent. It was documented. Heian closed the files. Unplugged the drive. Returned it to the drawer. She did not feel vindicated. She felt prepared. Outside, the city lights continued their steady movement. Systems functioning. Infrastructure humming. Seoul is operating exactly as designed. She stood. Walked to the window. Rested her hand against the glass. Tomorrow, she would attend Min-jun's parent-teacher conference. She would smile at the appropriate moments. She would take notes. She would discuss his progress in mathematics and his quiet nature during group activities. She would not mention what she had seen. She would not mention what she knew. Because preparation was not the same as reaction. And she had learned long ago that the most effective audits happened silently, observation first, action only when systems had been fully mapped. She turned off the light. Walked to the bedroom. Lay down beside the space where her husband should have been. Closed her eyes. And waited. 3 days later, Jun-suk returned with a gift. He entered the penthouse at 7 in the evening. Earlier than usual. Tie loosened but still present. Briefcase set down by the door with the practiced efficiency of a man who measured his movements. In his hand, a small box. Navy blue. Embossed with a brand name that appeared only in private catalogs. He placed it on the dining table. For Min-jun, he said. Not apologetic. Factual. Hae-in was preparing dinner. She glanced at the box. Nodded once. He's finishing homework, she said evenly. Jun-suk loosened his cufflinks. Poured himself water from the filtered pitcher. Drank standing up. I was busy, he added. Not defensively. Simply stating conditions. Hae-in set the knife down. Turned to face him. I know, she said. Her tone was neutral. No edge. No coldness. Just acknowledgement. Jun-suk studied her for a moment. Found nothing unusual. Nodded and walked toward the study. 10 minutes later, Min-jun emerged from his room. He saw the box. Approached it carefully. From your father, Hae-in said quietly. Min-jun opened it. Inside, a watch. Slim. Elegant. Designed for children of conglomerate families, the kind exchanged at private gatherings, never advertised, always understood. The face was silver. The band is adjustable. Engraved on the back, persistence. Min-jun held it carefully. Turned it over in his hands. It's nice, he said. Not excited. Not disappointed. Just observing. He placed it back in the box. Closed the lid. Set it aside. Thank you, he said, though Jun-suk was not in the room to hear it. Hae-in watched him return to his homework. Watched him settle back into focus without disruption. He had learned not to expect more than what was given. That night, after Min-jun was asleep, Hae-in returned to the study. She opened her laptop. Accessed the building's security system, credentials she had maintained from when they first moved in, back when Jun-suk had insisted she oversee household logistics. She reviewed the entry logs. On the morning of Min-jun's birthday, the morning Jun-suk had left before sunrise, the system showed 2 entries. First, 5:47 a.m. departure. Second, 6:12 a.m. return. Duration, 6 minutes. Hae-in pulled the hallway camera footage. Jun-suk had re-entered the penthouse. Walked directly to his study. Retrieved something from the locked drawer. Exited again without stopping anywhere else. The gift had been in the apartment the entire time. He had not forgotten. He had chosen. Chosen to leave without acknowledging the day. Chosen to return later, on his own schedule, with the performance of remembrance. Chosen the timing of his generosity as a function of convenience, not care. The birthday had been marked. Just not honored. Hae-in closed the laptop. Sat back in the chair. Her hands rested flat on the desk. Her breathing remained even. This was not cruelty. This was architecture. Jun-suk had designed a life where affection operated on a schedule he controlled. Where presence was rationed. Where love was a performance that could be delivered or delayed depending on what else required his attention. And he had assumed no one would check the infrastructure. Hae-in stood. Walked to the window. Soul stretched beneath her, millions of lights, millions of systems, all functioning because someone had designed them to. She had spent years accepting that design. Tonight, she realized she had also spent years documenting it. The gift sat on the dining table. Perfect. Timed. Calculated. A man who forgot would have panicked. Apologized. Overcompensated. A man who chose simply arrived when convenient. Hae-in turned off the light. Returned to bed. lay beside the space that was still empty. And understood, finally, that exclusion had never been accidental. It had been intentional. Publicly, nothing changed. Jun Suk appeared at the Seongsadong Investment Forum on Tuesday. Gave a keynote address about sustainable infrastructure development. His words were measured. His posture is confident. Applause arrived on cue. He hosted a private birthday banquet at Walker Hill for the wife of a board member. 70 guests. Floral arrangements that cost more than most weddings. A pianist who played without sheet music. He donated anonymously to a university in Busan. The announcement appeared in business journals the following week: unnamed benefactor, 8-figure sum, scholarship fund for engineering students. His name grew larger. His calendar remained full. His reputation, untouchable. But privately, systems began to shift. Haein attended fewer events. When she did, she arrived early. Positioned herself near the wives who spoke quietly over tea before the main program began. The ones who managed foundations. The ones who understood inheritance law better than romance. She listened. At a doljanchi, a first birthday celebration for the grandson of a prominent construction chairman, she heard the whispers. Not about affairs. Not about scandals. About ownership. JH Holdings restructured again, one woman said, voice low over delicate porcelain. Third time in 2 years. Contingency clauses, another added. Voting rights adjusted. Hyunwoo's trust was moved to primary status last quarter. Haein sipped her tea. Said nothing. Who inherits if something unexpected happens? Someone asked. Silence followed. The kind that means everyone knows the answer, but no one wants to say it aloud. Haein excused herself. Left the gathering early. That night, she reviewed Minjun's trust documents. Unchanged. Intact. Primary beneficiary status, confirmed. But the language had been subtly altered. Contingency clauses had been added. Provisions that activated under specific conditions, conditions that required her consent, her signature, her participation. Jun Suk had not replaced Min Jun. He had created a system where both children could inherit, if she agreed to the structure. The affair had never been about replacing her son. It had been about testing how much he could divide his empire without anyone refusing the division. Haein closed the documents. Walked to the kitchen. Poured herself water. Drank it standing at the counter, the same way Jun Suk did. The other child, Hyunwoo, was not a threat. He was a test. A question asked without words: would she accept being one of two? Would she stay silent while her son's inheritance was quietly diluted? Would she prioritize stability over principle? Jun Suk had assumed the answer was yes. Men like him always did. The following week, Haein visited her parents in Jeonju. She took Min Jun, told Jun Suk it was a routine visit. He nodded, distracted by a call from Singapore. In Jeonju, she met quietly with an old classmate. A woman who now works in family court administration. They had tea in a small shop near the river. Hypothetically, Haein said carefully, what happens when corporate trusts conflict with marital assets? Her friend stirred her tea slowly. Hypothetically, she replied, the one who documents first controls the narrative. They spoke for an hour. No notes. No recordings. Just two women who understood that systems protect those who master their language. Haein returned to Seoul that evening. At home, Min Jun asked a single question. Why did he bring that boy? Haein knelt beside him. Met his eyes. Some men divide their lives instead of choosing one, she said simply. Min Jun nodded. Thought for a moment. Is that fair? He asked. No, she said. He did not ask again. That night, Jun Suk called from Incheon. A deal had stalled. A bank in Singapore was requesting clarifications. Nothing serious. Just friction. I'll be late, he said. I understand, Hayan replied. She hung up. Opened her laptop. And began documenting everything she had learned. Not emotionally. Systematically. Min-jun asked only once more. It was during breakfast. Saturday morning. Jun-suk had already left for a golf meeting in Pyeongchang. The penthouse was quiet except for the soft sound of utensils against porcelain. Min-jun ate his rice slowly. Methodically. Then stopped. Mom. Hayan looked up from her tea. Is that boy my brother? The question arrived without preamble. Without emotion. Just curiosity seeking clarity. Hayan set down her cup. Folded her hands on the table. Yes, she said simply. Min-jun absorbed this. Nodded slightly. Does he live with his mother? Yes. Does father visit him? Yes. Min-jun returned to his rice. Took 3 more bites. Set down his chopsticks. Does father love him more? Hayan's expression did not change. Her voice remained steady. Your father divides his attention, she said. That is not the same as love. Min-jun considered this. His small hands rested flat on the table, mirroring her posture without realizing it. What should I do? He asked. Nothing, Hayan said. You are 7. This is not your responsibility. He looked at her directly. His eyes were serious. Old beyond their years. What will you do? Hayan held his gaze. What is necessary, she said. Min-jun nodded. Finished his breakfast. Excused himself politely. He did not ask again. That afternoon, Hayan took him to Bukshan. They walked through the narrow streets between traditional hanok houses. Tourists took photographs. Vendors sold rice cakes wrapped in wax paper. They said very little. Min-jun held her hand. Not tightly. Just present. At a small tea house, they sat by the window. Hayan ordered barley tea. Min-jun drew in a small notebook he carried everywhere. She watched him work. His concentration was absolute. His lines precise. He had inherited Jun-suk's discipline without his cruelty. Her composure without her resignation. When they returned home that evening, Jun-suk was in the living room. Rare. He sat reviewing documents, glasses perched on his nose. How was your day? He asked without looking up. Fine, Hayan said. Good, he replied. Min-jun walked past without speaking. Went to his room. Closed the door quietly. Jun-suk did not notice. He signed 3 documents. Made 2 calls. Poured himself whiskey and stood by the window, looking out at the city he believed he controlled. Hayan prepared dinner. Set the table. Called them both when it was ready. They ate in silence. Jun-suk's phone buzzed twice. He ignored it. A small performance of presence. The forum went well, he said eventually. The minister was impressed with the infrastructure proposal. That's good, Hayan said. Singapore closes next week. The timing is critical. I'm sure it will go smoothly. Jun-suk glanced at her. Found nothing unusual. Returned to his meal. After dinner, he retreated to his study. Min-jun finished his homework. Hayan cleaned the kitchen with the same precision she applied to everything. At 9:30, she tucked Min-jun into bed. Mom, he said quietly. Yes. You're not sad. Hayan smoothed his blanket. Her hand rested briefly on his shoulder. Sadness is not useful, she said. Clarity is. Min-jun thought about this. Then nodded. Okay. She kissed his forehead. Turned off the light. In the hallway, she paused. Through the study door, she could hear Jun-suk on the phone. His voice was low. Comfortable. The tone he used when speaking to people he trusted. She did not try to listen. She simply noted the time. The duration. The pattern. Then she walked to her own desk. Opened her laptop. And continued building the map of systems that Jun-suk believed were invisible. He mistook her silence for acceptance. Men like him always did. But silence was not the same as agreement. And observation was not the same as inaction. By midnight, she had documented 3 more subsidiary formations. 2 property transfers. 1 foundation restructuring that moved voting rights without announcing the change. She saved everything methodically. Backed up the files. Encrypted the drive. Then she closed the laptop. Turned off the light. And went to bed in a space beside her husband, who had finally come to sleep but would never truly rest beside her again. The friction began subtly. A real estate deal in Incheon stalled during the final review. Nothing dramatic. Just a delay. The bank requested additional documentation. Standard procedure, the lawyer assured Jun-suk. 2 weeks at most. 2 weeks became 3. Then 4. A partnership in Singapore requested clarifications on subsidiary ownership structures. Routine due diligence, they said. Just confirming the corporate hierarchy before closing. The documents were submitted. New questions arrived. At a charity gala in Cheongdam-dong, the foundation director greeted Jun-suk warmly. But when Jun-suk mentioned the upcoming auction, the one where he was expected to serve as honorary patron, the director's smile remained while his eyes shifted. "We're still finalizing the program," he said smoothly. "I'll have my assistant reach out." The call never came. Jun-suk noticed the pattern but misdiagnosed its source. Incompetence, he said at dinner one night. Everyone moves more slowly these days. No urgency. Hae-in nodded. Continued eating. She did not mention that she had spent the previous afternoon meeting with her former colleague. A woman who now works in corporate compliance. They had discussed hypothetical scenarios over tea in Gangnam. If someone wanted to slow a deal without blocking it, Hae-in had asked carefully, what pressure points exist. Her colleague had smiled. Not unkindly. Documentation requests. Regulatory clarifications. Board member concerns about disclosure obligations. She paused. The system has 1,000 soft stops. Most people never notice them until they've already lost momentum. And if the person in question has significant influence? Influence requires networks to remain aligned. If questions start circulating quietly, nothing accusatory, just procedural, networks become cautious. They finished their tea. Thanked each other politely. No explicit agreement was made. But Hae-in left understanding that whispers required only careful placement, not volume. By the following week, a board member at JH Holdings requested a private meeting with Jun-suk. The conversation was brief. Professional. Some institutional investors are asking questions, the board member said. Nothing serious. Just standard governance reviews. Wanting to confirm subsidiary relationships. Verify disclosure completeness. Jun-suk frowned. Everything is documented. Of course. I'm sure it's routine. Just wanted you to be aware. The meeting ended cordially. But afterward, Jun-suk spent 3 hours reviewing files. Making calls. Requesting confirmations from legal. Everything was in order. Everything was documented. Yet something felt misaligned. That night, a law office near Gwangwamun placed a call. Not to Jun-suk. To Hae-in. The voice was respectful. Measured. "We have received documentation that requires verification," the lawyer said. It concerns corporate marital disclosure obligations under amended family law provisions. Nothing urgent. Just procedural review. What documentation? Hayen asked calmly. Trust structures. Subsidiary beneficiary designations. We're confirming alignment with registered marital assets. Standard practice during governance audits. I understand. We may need to schedule a brief meeting. Your legal representative can attend if you prefer. That won't be necessary. I'll review the relevant provisions and respond appropriately. Thank you, Mrs. Kang. Hayen hung up. She did not tell Jun-suk. She simply made a note. Added it to her timeline. Cross-referenced it with the other delays. The following morning, Jun-suk received a call from the bank in Singapore. The deal was approved. Finally. But the celebration was muted. The delay had cost momentum. 2 other investors had moved to alternative projects during the waiting period. At home, Jun-suk was distracted. He answered emails during dinner. Made calls from the study that extended past midnight. His tone on the phone had shifted from confident to careful. Hayen maintained her routine. She prepared meals. Attended Min-jun's school events. Smiled politely at building staff. Publicly, nothing had changed. Privately, she had made one quiet legal move. A single filing. Discreet. Technical. A request for trust documentation review under provisions most people never invoked. Not an accusation. Just a procedural inquiry that required an institutional response. The kind of question that triggered other questions. The kind of question that made banks pause. Made board members request meetings. Made foundations reconsider patronage relationships. Not because anything was wrong. But because questions create friction. And friction creates hesitation. And hesitation creates space. By the end of the month, Jun-suk noticed that doors no longer opened quite as smoothly. Reservations took longer to confirm. Return calls arrived hours later instead of immediately. Nothing collapsed. Everything just slowed. And he could not identify why. Hayen packed on a Thursday afternoon. Not dramatically. Not obviously. A single overnight bag. Min-jun's clothes were folded neatly. A few books. His notebook. Essentials only. She placed it in the closet of the guest room. Out of sight. Accessible. Jun-suk was in Busan. A regional summit. He would return Saturday evening. On Friday, Hayen took Min-jun to school as usual. Spoke with his teacher about an upcoming project. Collected him at 3. They had dinner together. Quiet. Unremarkable. That night, she reviewed the apartment lease she had signed 3 weeks earlier. A modest unit in Mapo. 2 bedrooms. River view. Nothing extravagant. Registered under her maiden name through a management company that specialized in privacy. The deposit had been transferred from an account Jun-suk did not monitor. An inheritance account from her grandmother. Dormant for years. Now active. She had furnished the apartment minimally. A bed. A desk. A small dining table. Enough to function. Not enough to suggest permanence. This was not an exit. This was an option. Saturday morning, she received a text from an unknown number. Documentation submitted. Review initiated. Estimated timeline, 14 to 21 business days. She deleted it. Made breakfast. Cleaned the kitchen. Played cards with Min-jun at the dining table. At noon, her phone rang. Jun-suk. I'll be late, he said. The minister wants to continue discussions over dinner. I'll stay another night. Understood, Hayen replied. Is everything fine there? Yes. Min-jun and I are managing well. Good. I'll see you tomorrow. The call ended. Hae-in set down her phone. Looked at Min-jun across the table. Would you like to visit a new place? She asked. Min-jun tilted his head. Where? Somewhere quiet. Just for a night. An adventure. He considered this. Then nodded. They left at 2. Hae-in drove carefully through weekend traffic. Min-jun watched the city pass through the window. He did not ask questions. He had learned that his mother's silences meant something was shifting, and shifts required patience. The apartment in Mapo was small. Clean. Sunlight came through the windows at an angle that made the space feel larger than it was. Min-jun explored quietly. Opened closets. Looked out at the river. Found the small desk where his notebooks had already been placed. Is this ours? He asked. It's a place we can use, Hae-in said. When we need space. From father? She knelt beside him. Met his eyes. From everything, she said. He nodded. Understood in the way children do when explanations would only complicate what is already clear. That night, they ate simple food. Watched the city lights reflect on the water. Min-jun fell asleep easily in the new bed. Hae-in sat by the window. Her phone buzzed once. A message from the building security at the penthouse. Jun-suk had returned early. Entered at 10:47 p.m. She did not respond. 20 minutes later, another message. This one from Jun-suk. Where are you? She waited 15 minutes before replying. Stayed at my parents'. Min-jun wanted to see them. Back tomorrow. The response came immediately. You didn't mention this. It was spontaneous. He missed them. A pause. Then. Fine. See you tomorrow. Hae-in set down her phone. She had not lied. She had simply created a narrative that explained absence without requiring justification. Jun-suk would accept it because questioning it would require acknowledging that her movements mattered. And acknowledging that would mean admitting he had been monitoring. Men like him preferred the illusion of control to the confirmation of its limits. Sunday morning, they returned to the penthouse. Jun-suk was in the study. He emerged when he heard the door. How were your parents? He asked. Well, Hae-in said. They enjoyed seeing Min-jun. Good. He looked at her for a moment longer than usual. Searching for something. Finding nothing. Then he returned to his study. Hae-in unpacked slowly. Put everything back in its place. Erased evidence of departure. But the bag remained in the guest room closet. Packed. Ready. Waiting. Not as a threat. As preparation. Because exits did not require announcements. They required timing. And she was still mapping the system. The headlines did not break. They adjusted. On a Tuesday morning, the business section of a major daily mentioned that JH Holdings had postponed a regional expansion announcement. No reason given. Just a single line buried in the quarterly review. A foundation in Gangnam quietly removed Jun-suk's name from the list of honorary patrons for an upcoming art auction. The website was updated without fanfare. No press release. No explanation. An international banking consortium requested a third round of documentation for a Singapore partnership. Standard procedure, they assured him. Just confirming compliance with updated disclosure requirements. The deal did not collapse. It simply entered review. Indefinite. Jun-suk began making calls. He reached out to board members. To lawyers. To institutional contacts he had cultivated over decades. Everyone was polite. Professional. Reassuring. Nothing to worry about. Just routine governance updates. These things take time. But the doors that had always opened smoothly now opened with hesitation. The invitations that had always arrived first now arrived later, or not at all. The meetings that had been scheduled months in advance were postponed. Rescheduled. Postponed again. Nothing exploded. Everything just slowed. At a luncheon in Gangnam, Jun-suk sat beside a construction chairman he had known for 15 years. They discussed market conditions, infrastructure projects, interest rate forecasts. Normal conversation. But when Jun-suk mentioned a joint venture opportunity, the chairman nodded thoughtfully. "Let me review the details with my board," he said. "We're being more careful with partnership structures these days. Governance sensitivity, you understand." Jun-suk understood. He understood that something essential had shifted, even if he could not identify the source. That week, a journalist called. Not aggressively. Just routinely. "I'm writing a profile piece on corporate family structures," she said pleasantly. "Specifically, how chaebol families navigate complex trust arrangements. Would you be available for comment?" "I don't give interviews about personal matters," Jun-suk said. "Of course. I understand. I just thought, given the recent governance discussions, you might want to provide context." "What governance discussions?" "Oh, just industry conversation. Trust disclosure updates. Subsidiary transparency requirements. Nothing specific to JH Holdings." The call ended cordially. But Jun-suk sat at his desk for 20 minutes afterward, staring at his phone. The question had been asked. Not publicly. Not accusatorily. Just asked. And in elite circles, questions did not need answers to create consequences. They only needed circulation. At home, he became quieter. He reviewed documents late into the night. Made calls from the study with the door closed. His tone shifted from commanding to clarifying. From directing to defending. Hae-in maintained her routine. She prepared meals. Attended school events. Spoke politely to building staff. She noticed that the concierge greeted Jun-suk differently now. Still respectful. Still professional. But the depth of the bow had decreased by perhaps 5 degrees. Small. Invisible to anyone not trained to observe systems. But present. One evening, Jun-suk came home earlier than expected. He found Hae-in and Min-jun at the dining table. Homework spread between them. He stood in the doorway. Watched them for a moment. "Is everything fine?" he asked. Hae-in looked up. Her expression was neutral. "Yes." "Why? You seem distant lately." "I'm the same as always," she said evenly. He studied her. Found nothing he could identify as wrong. Found nothing he could identify as right. "Have you heard anything?" he asked. "Any talk? Any questions about the company?" "No," she said. "Should I have?" He hesitated. Then shook his head. "No. Just checking." He retreated to his study. Hae-in returned to helping Min-jun with mathematics. Her hand was steady as she pointed to equations. Her voice was calm as she explained solutions. That night, Jun-suk could not sleep. He stood by the window at 2 in the morning. Looked out at Seoul. The city that had always bent around his presence now felt slightly misaligned. Nothing had collapsed. He was still wealthy. Still powerful. Still respected. But something essential had become inaccessible. Not his money. Not his position. His certainty. The belief that systems existed to serve him. Those doors opened because he approached them. That silence meant agreement rather than calculation. He did not understand what had changed. Only that it had. In the guest room, the overnight bag remained packed. In Mapo, the apartment remained furnished. In Gangnam, the lawyer's office remained open for consultation. In corporate registries across Seoul, documentation remained filed and waiting. Not explosively. Procedurally. And procedures did not need to be loud to be devastating. They only needed to be thorough. By the end of the month, Jun-suk would still attend board meetings. Still sign contracts. Still appear in business journals beside words like influential and strategic. But the adjectives would arrive half a beat slower. The approvals would require additional review. The invitations would come with caveats. And he would not know why. Because the most effective collapses do not announce themselves. They simply redistribute weight until the foundation realizes it was never as solid as it appeared. Hae-in turned off the light in Min-jun's room. Walked to the window. Watched the city lights move in their steady patterns. And understood that some victories were measured not in what was taken, but in what could no longer be assumed. The apartment in Mapo became routine. Not a sanctuary. Not a refuge. Just another space where life continued with different variables. Hae-in and Min-jun stayed there 2 nights each week. Sometimes 3. The pattern was irregular enough to avoid suspicion. Spontaneous enough to resist interrogation. Visiting friends, she would say. Giving Min-jun variety, she would explain. Jun-suk stopped questioning it. Questioning would require acknowledging that her movements mattered. That her presence was not a constant he could depend on. That absence had become a choice rather than an impossibility. At the penthouse, he grew quieter. His calls lasted longer. His expressions tightened. The confidence that had always moved with him like a second skin now felt rehearsed. He still attended meetings. Still signed contracts. Still appeared at events where his presence validated entire initiatives. But something had hollowed. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just enough that people who had known him for decades began using different words. Jun-suk seems tired lately. The pressure must be significant. He's been through so much expansion. Perhaps consolidation is wise. No one mentioned a scandal. No one referenced affairs, hidden children, or corporate irregularities. There was nothing to reference. Just a slow redistribution of certainty. A gradual erosion of the assumption that Kang Jun-suk existed outside consequence. In December, the Singapore deal finally closed. Reduced scope. Adjusted terms. Still profitable. Still significant. But not transformative. The celebration was muted. The board meeting brief. The press release is factual without being triumphant. Jun-suk stood at the window of his office. Looked out at Gangnam. The skyline he had helped build. He was still wealthy. Still powerful. Still feared by those who needed to fear him. But he had lost something essential. Not money. Not status. Control over the narrative. The ability to decide which parts of his life remained separate. Which truths stayed hidden. Which systems bent without resistance. He had assumed that wealth was completely insulated. That power meant immunity. That silence from those around him indicated acceptance rather than observation. He had been wrong. And the realization arrived too late to prevent, only late enough to recognize. On a cold January evening, Jun-suk returned to the penthouse. Hae-in was preparing dinner. Min-jun was reading at the table. Everything looked the same. But Jun-suk felt the difference. The way Hae-in moved through the kitchen, not for him, but alongside him. The way Min-jun acknowledged his presence was with politeness but not eagerness. The way the apartment felt less like home and more like a space they all occupied temporarily. "How was your day?" he asked. "Productive," Hae-in replied. "Min-jun?" "Fine," the boy said without looking up. Jun-suk sat at the table. Waited for dinner. Ate when it was served. No one spoke unnecessarily. After the meal, he retreated to his study. Reviewed documents that no longer felt urgent. Made notes that no longer felt consequential. Around midnight, he walked to the guest room. The door was slightly open. Inside, he saw the overnight bag. Partially visible in the closet. He stared at it for a long moment. Did not touch it. Did not ask about it. Simply absorbed its presence. Evidence of preparation. Of options. Of a life that could exist separately from the one he had designed. He closed the door quietly. Returned to his own room. Lie down in the bed where Heian would eventually join him, though increasingly later each night. And understood, finally, what he had lost. Not his wife's presence. She was still there. Not his son's respect. The boy was still polite. Not his wealth or status or reputation. What he had lost was the assumption of permanence. The belief that the systems he had built were immovable. That the people within those systems would remain positioned where he had placed them. That power meant ownership of not just resources, but certainty itself. He had divided his life carefully. Strategically. And someone had simply documented the division and asked one procedural question: what happens when the structure is examined rather than assumed? The answer had arrived slowly. Not through confrontation. Not through scandal. Through hesitation. Through delay. Through doors that no longer opened at the first approach. Through a wife who no longer needed him to feel safe. Through a son who no longer expected him to be present. Through a city that still recognized his name but no longer rearranged itself around his convenience. In Mapo, the river moved steadily beneath the bridge lights. Heian stood at the window. Min-jun slept peacefully in the next room. Her phone was silent. Her calendar is clear. She had not destroyed Kang Jun-suk. She had simply removed his assumption that she could not exist without him. And in doing so, had removed the foundation of every system he believed he controlled. No scandal would break. No revenge would be declared. No public collapse would satisfy those who waited for drama. But every door that had opened for him would now open more slowly. Every assumption that had protected him would now require verification. Every silence that had indicated acceptance would now suggest calculation. He would remain wealthy. He would remain powerful. He would remain recognized. But he would never again feel untouchable. Because the most devastating losses are not what is taken. They are what can no longer be assumed. And Kang Jun-suk, who had built an empire on the assumption that wealth meant immunity, had learned too late that power never truly owns anything. It only borrows certainty. And certainly, once questioned, never fully returns. Heian turned from the window. Checked on Min-jun one final time. Then went to sleep in a bed that belonged entirely to her. In a space that existed outside her husband's design. In a life that had quietly, irrevocably, become her own.